Hello everyone, and welcome to the first episode of Talk with a Flock. I am William Patterson, your gracious host, and here alongside me on my left and right are my fellow panel members. So before we get started today, we're going to introduce all of our panel members, starting with Billy Utzinger.
Hi, I'm Billy Utzinger. Pleasure to be here.
Hello there, I'm Garrett Sonderland.
You know me.
Joe Mulcahy.
Ray Catola.
Did you forget your last name, Ray?
Sometimes it gets away from me.
Oh, well.
In these news cycles, at least.
Well, let's try to find it. All right, folks, today we're going to get started off with the boss's monologue, the main topic we're going to be talking about today. Fake news this. Fake news that. These are all alternative facts. Does any of this sound familiar? If you haven't heard already, you must be living in a cave. Follow the trail of Make America Great Again hats, and you'll get the picture. Better yet, tune into CNN, MSNBC, or any major news outlet. The very people President Trump accuses of the fake news agenda. You see, ever since he announced his campaign for president in 2015, Trump has pushed this narrative that the country has been falling behind, especially to the Democratic Party and the biased media. And just like in any battle, there's always the other side. CNN has defended themselves against Trump's rants, especially being titled Clinton News Network, among other things. And that's what we're here to discuss. But before we do anything, let's define what fake news is. Fake news is a type of yellow journalism or propaganda that consists of deliberate disinformation or hoaxes spread via traditional print and broadcast news media or online social media. In other words, it's opinion-based journalism. There's no fact. It is based solely on a person's opinion. And is that what we're seeing here? There have been insane stories circulating around the country, and it's not just the National Enquirer with the cover story Brad Pitt fights for custody. No, there are stories of how Melania Trump did not move into the White House with the president during his first year because she had cancer? Yes, this was an actual story posted by CNN during Trump's first year in office, that she was ill and Trump was doing nothing to help her. Now, of course, this story has no basis because we've seen both the president and the first lady. She's healthy. She's doing well. But does that mean that all reporting on CNN's behalf is fake? Absolutely not. The fact of the matter is, disturbing things were heard during the campaign trail, from Trump's Access Hollywood tape to what he has said about race, women, and abortion, to name multiple topics. Many Republicans acknowledge that yes, he is not perfect. Things were taken out of context. One of the president's main flaws, according to many professors and legal scholars, is that he opens his mouth and he doesn't think about what he's saying. In fact, that he is the one spreading the fake news, not the media. So who's really to blame here? Is news really biased against Washington? Or has our president been playing the role of high school bully this whole time? This battle has gone on ever since. And it's like a great epic. Maybe like a Game of Thrones episode. The only difference is nobody's dying, and that's a good thing. But the point is that Trump's words were received and welcomed by many people in this country. People want to change, and they got it. Trump has shaken things up in Washington, so much so that CNN, ABC, and MSNBC love to cover him and report on his actions and tweets. In fact, a poll came out from the Washington Examiner that showed 92% of CNN's airtime was based on Trump-related stories. The Washington correspondent, Jim Acosta, has been probing former Press Secretary Sean Spicer and now current Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders for ongoing comments and on Trump's words and actions. Now, with catastrophic events, including what happened a couple weeks ago in the Carolinas with Hurricane Florence, and now coming soon, Hurricane Michael in Florida, while our prayers go out to the people who are being devastated by these treacherous storms, the president is still being pressured by the news outlets for fake news involving collusion with Russia? Come now. Our forefathers, George Washington and others, paved the way of our country and the beacon of freedom that it is. We constructed the Constitution around our countrymen and faithful women, joining together and agreeing on the greatest document of freedom in history. Our very own President Lincoln said, "A house divided against itself cannot stand." But one thing's for sure, ladies and gentlemen, this fight is not stopping. It is Washington versus the media, and it's time to talk about it. So let's get started.
Well, the first thing I want to bring up is you were talking about Russian collusion being fake news, and that's not necessarily the case at all. We've seen Paul Manafort's been convicted of well, not necessarily treason, but cooperating with foreign powers. You have George Papadopoulos. A lot of people within the Trump campaign were associated with some form of collusion. So it's not necessarily fake news. I understand what you're trying to get to with how it occupies the news cycle, but that kind of news is significant and is necessary to be reported. It's meant to pressure the president because if he is, in fact, a part of this ring, you should feel pressure from it.
And Ray brings up a good point. Say this is, not this President Trump spreading the fake news, and perhaps there was some form of collusion with Russia. It's all true. Why is the president being so, anti-media to the point where it's can become this, conflict between them?
Honestly, I think it's because the way that CNN has treated him over the course of the campaign, and I'm not necessarily saying that he doesn't deserve it because he treated the media like garbage. I think the fact is, there's always been fake news because I think Ray was talking about earlier that there was points about history that people made fake stories getting money. I think it's always been there, and I think Jonah talked about a good point. It's a way to discriminate your opponent, a way to discredit them. So by saying that a news source, which is influential, like CNN, is deliberately lying, you are discrediting them on a platform level. So.
Well, now, Jonah, say it's not completely fake. What if this is, just, stories that are, stories of interest? I mean, CNN certainly thinks so. As I stated, the Washington Examiner's poll, that 92% of airtime was dedicated to that. So,
well, I think the point is that people think it's fake because they say it's fake.
Right.
So that's even if something is true, if you say anyone could just say it's fake news and then somehow it makes the point not as valid.
And that part definitely speaks more to just the point, the cultural point of history we're at right now. Going back to the fake news point, it's typical of whenever you're being attacked by a power, you have to discredit it. As Jonah was saying, we see a lot of people in dictators in third world countries, for instance, will discredit the media just to justify their own power, not to compare Trump to those kind of tyrants, because quite frankly, they're way more smarter than he is. But the ultimate point comes down to when he has actual threats posed to his ego and to him as a leader, then the only way to fight that is to fight back to it. So you just discredit them. It's history 101 essentially.
I agree. And Gareth, is this really a battle of ego for Trump that he wants to discredit CNN with Clinton News Network? Is that really what this is all about?
Well, I don't know if it's necessarily all ego, but the thing is, there's always a point where there's sort of a counterpoint to whatever it is that's said. And for example, as we've mentioned, fake news. Yellow journalism has been around for over 100 years now. We look back at, let's say, the United States, the USS Maine that sunk in Cuba. And for the longest time, that was one of the earliest examples that we know of that reported that it was exactly their fault. And they kept saying that they must have bombed the ship, they must have sunk it into the bay, and with modern technology and with modern discoveries, it looks like it was something internal. It was either a heater core, or it was a boiler tank, or something on board, like a furnace that erupted, which caused damage to the ship. But years ago, it was pushed and pushed as much as it could be that this was at fault. And today, it's the same issue, in that whatever it makes the best story, they will try to stretch the truth in the best ways they can. So sometimes that'll test those people, and it can make them aggravated. Sometimes they'll try to lie themselves to try to make the best point. I mean, as it's a little bit of human nature. We always want the best of something, even if it's not exactly the way it is. Sometimes we try to stretch things, whether it be in journalism, whether it be what we believe in ourselves, what we believe in for company policies, for all sorts of reasons. We try to say things that are not always true, and other times people do the opposite to try to just make a point or just draw attention to themselves. And so it can be an issue.
And Jonah, Gareth is correct. I believe that he's right on that point, that sometimes people will say things, maybe true things or incorrect things to hurt someone's feelings. Is that what's going on here? That the feelings and the bias, if the reporters have it, is it feelings versus fact? Is that what's going on?
Well,
here?
if they think it's true, if they convince themselves that it's true, I mean, it could be true.
It could be.
Yeah. So.
Well, you say things so many times, and it's in your mindset. It's a psychological thing. But so yeah, I'll let you have the last word on this one.
I guess back to Jonah, it's like you ever read the book 1984? It's like if you tell a lie over and over, eventually people will believe it. And I think in this modern age, we have the internet, we have huge access to information, And I think it's easy to pick out information that you seek out. So like if you're really against Trump, you could like look for particular information.
Exactly.
And I think for journalists, it's much more of like who can get the most views in terms of like how many people can look at my news, read it, and say, okay, I agree with them. So it makes sense to have like the most wackiest titles, the most like eye-attentive titles, like the one you talked about, like Trump's wife having cancer.
Yes. I
So
agree.
I think that's a good example right there to show that
It is.
some journalists maybe don't care about telling the truth and just want views. I'm not saying all of them, but some people
I would
obviously
agree
don't.
with that.
I do like the fact that you brought up technology and that it is one source we have which can really help us to try to find the truth among today's
Agreed.
world, because we have so many more cameras, so much more documentation, so many more sources, even in our pockets, that we can look up what may actually have really been said. We can find out the actual answer.
Agreed.
But on the counter end of that, there's also the issue that people can use it to manipulate the truth and try to type things, write things, edit things that may not be accurate and have us believing them.
Agreed. All right, well, guys, that was a very good debate, and that's our boss topic of the day. Tell us what you think on YouTube or comment on social media with ECTV Channel 40. Coming up next, Brett Kavanaugh was sworn into the most powerful court in America, but not everybody is happy given the plethora of allegations against him. We'll discuss this and many more topics when we return. Welcome back, everyone. Brett Kavanaugh was sworn in just days ago and is now the 9th judge of the U.S. Supreme Court. This is President Trump's second successful confirmation following Neil Gorsuch last year. But this was not an easy road for Kavanaugh. In fact, he described it as, quote, having my reputation being dragged through the mud. The sexual assault allegations made by Dr. Christy Blasey Ford proved to be a major issue for both Democrats and Republicans, and it has made history for years to come. All right, guys, I'll start with you on this one. I've never seen, what happened here, issue something as big as this in anything, like, a Supreme Court nomination. I think back, to when Reagan appointed, his name was Broke, but they called him a fascist. But now here, this is something on a whole different level.
I mean, yeah, it is. It's interesting because now we live in a time period where, we can bring things that happened in the past and kind of like try to use it to see what type of person he is today. But I think what many people forgot is, because of the Me Too era, that you're innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. And I think that because of the Me Too era that we live in, many people say stand by her with the victim, which I'm not saying is a bad thing. I think it's a great thing that women are coming out to speak out against sexual assault. But I think it blurs the line between, okay, what is acceptable to believe the victim and giving the accused a chance to defend himself and say this never happened, because some people can abuse this and destroys people's reputation, like we see here today, who could potentially be, innocent, but then again, could potentially maybe not. So.
Agreed. And Ray, he brings up a good point with the Me Too movement. I myself am also in support of that, and that anyone.
Well, I thought you were going to say you got Me Too, but okay, go on.
Okay.
I was really worried about that segue.
But any woman who has been through such a traumatic experience as that should have the right to come out and name the person that did that to her.
Yeah.
But also with Kavanaugh, should there not be a due process at the same time with this case?
Well, a lot of people were trying to misconstrue what was happening as a trial when it was just a hearing. That's the first thing. But it was more so a job interview, and
right.
That of course was why the allegations were an issue to begin with, because that kind of conduct being placed on the highest court of the land definitely has the risk of tarnishing that reputation, which we see Chief Justice Roberts is really focused on trying to maintain. But what we see with Me Too is mostly just the pot has been boiling for so long and the water is splashing over that women, why are you laughing? I'm trying to make a point here. Women have dealt with men overpowering them for so long that it's almost we as a society are aiming to try and just trust them more, because we understand that this has been a cultural issue for a long time in this country. But there definitely, of course, due process is necessary in terms of trying to go about figuring out the truth of the matter, but it's not like we're irrationally supporting women because we understand the likelihood of those kind of allegations being true, at least judged by Blasey Ford's testimony, is very likely, going along with other testimonies of Kavanaugh's Yale roommates as well as people that went to Yale with Kavanaugh, somewhat corroborating his behavior but not the action that occurred with Blasey Ford. But the point being is that due process is not necessarily there not for no just reason. It's because we understand that women have been at a disadvantage culturally for such a long time that we're almost using it as a means to justify, or not to justify, but rather try and balance it out in the end.
Agreed. And Jonah, you know, when we talk about, you know, the protesting that has been going on ever since these allegations were brought up, senators' offices has been stormed by protesters. They've been stopped in elevators, you know, asking them, why would you support this man? And to the point where many people, you know, have called this, you know, a little too aggressive. Do you agree with that?
Well, I think, well, yeah, obviously, usually when people are trying to get a point across and they resort to physical violence and things like that, sometimes it means their point isn't very well backed up. The biggest issue with something like this is bias. So if you're a Trump supporter, you're obviously more likely to support Kavanaugh's point. But if obviously you're a Democrat, you're more likely to believe Ford.
Yeah.
On top of the fact that Democrats are more likely to support with women's rights issues like abortion and things like that. So it kind of goes in line with it just dividing us more and more.
Yeah.
Well, I think the other thing too goes back to the point I was making, where it's that if women are getting this pushback from trying to just get justice for the way men treat women in society, if they're getting a bunch of noise coming that way, the only way to fight it back, and we were talking about this with fake news, is that they have to be even louder. And so you'll see them storming senators' offices and such because they don't feel like they're being heard. So again, there's reason and rationale to why things are getting so extreme in these events, and I feel like we're ignoring that part, and that's not helping it at all.
And Gareth, Jonah brought up a good point about, you know, Democrats and Republicans, how it's clear that when it comes down to this case, it was clear which side was leaning which way. Obviously there has to be a way we can look at this case, you know, as, you know, people with common sense about this case. Exclude parties. We're human beings like this, something happened here, why can't we judge it as such?
Right, that's one thing I've noticed before. It seems that in recent years, more and more, that both parties are being drawn further and further apart from one another, which is unfortunate because as a country we do need to work together at some points in order to achieve the goals that we wish. But the issue is that in some cases they are led to believe, sometimes, as mentioned before, there can be some fake news, there can be a bit of propaganda in some ways, to be so bold as to say something like that, that could actually be influencing some of the decisions made by these parties, and which could actually lead to some problems down the road for them in the way that they have to face each other, the way that they react with one another. And in many cases, it can be hard to tell when there is a serious matter at hand and when there isn't, because in some cases, you know, they could be led to believe something in particular which is not true, and yet it's been influenced all their decisions prior up to that. And sometimes they keep getting more and more immense as time goes on. It's almost as if I were to strike you, you were to strike me harder afterwards, and so on, et cetera, et cetera. It just keeps escalating, which is an issue because once in a while we do need to work together on some aspects to resolve the situations we have at hand.
But I think there's a point you missed on the rift in the party, and it all comes down to power. It is entirely a power game between the Democrats and the Republicans. You look back to 2010 when the Republicans take back Congress, and 2 years into Obama's term after the 2008 recession and such. That's when the census also happened, and we start to see the Republicans who are in control be able to start to morph their districts and stuff, and they're actively using their positions. I'm not saying the Democrats haven't done this in history either. It's just we're in the point now where the Republicans are making their effort to try and seize power in this American government, and you see Mitch McConnell openly admitting that in terms of wanting to appoint another justice onto the Supreme Court before 2020. It's all essentially just a game of trying to push that agenda as opposed to push the agenda to which American people most agree with. Republicans think that's the voice of America, but that's because they've created their own constituency. They aren't listening to all the voices.
I'd agree with that, and I'll add on to that point. It's always a power. It is not singled out to one party. You know, Republicans and Democrats both do this. It's the idea that when you have the majority power, you want to do everything you can before you lose it, and vice versa. I'll let you have the last word on this.
I guess I'm like the last word on the show, but my take on it is because as you guys said before, it's because it's like a power game. I think people who are trying to like get power, like try to one up each other in terms of Republicans and Democrats, they kind of like handle this case poorly. I remember like one of the person who got it, I forgot her name honestly, but she was like a Democrat. She could have informed them, you know.
Feinstein.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Oh, the ranking member, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, but if they could have handled this privately.
Agreed. Yeah.
They could.
Well, they tried to.
They tried to.
Remember that, they tried to, but then the letter from Blasey Ford
That's
got
true.
leaked, and that's when her identity got released, and then that's when all the threats started.
Yeah, because it's official. Dr. Blasey Ford wanted this confidential in the beginning, but this was again leaked to other people, so it's gotten way blown out of the water. This issue. So this is definitely an important issue, and it's still growing. So we will continue to cover the aftermath of the story and how this affects the country. Coming up next, we are going to talk about the battle, as we just talked about, between the Republicans and Democrats, and how the battle between the parties is getting extremely serious. The mighty donkey and elephant, the renowned mascots of the two most dominant parties in American politics. Recently, these two are in increasing odds with the election of President Trump and now appointment of Brett Kavanaugh. These two have been at odds for years. As you saw in the hearings, Senator Grassley and Senator Feinstein could not develop a serious relationship, and everything came back to petty insults. Ray, this is not just signaled out to the hearing, as we talked about before. This has been going on for a while now. Why?
Well, it all started with. Actually, it's a good question where it started, because you can link back many events to the point in which the parties are at now. You could say, for instance, it was the election of Barack Obama, the first African-American president. You could also say that it goes back to his lame duck period back when, in 2016, when we were trying to elect Hillary Clinton or Trump or anyone else, really, Bernie Sanders as well. You can even go back further, going back to W. Bush, who also is a controversial. So I feel like each president has been almost a development in this struggle for power, to the point now where we have the Republicans being the majority and trying to, again, cling to that, because there's a culture war that they want to be happening.
Right.
You see it back when the birther movement started with Barack Obama. You see it develop further with news outlets like Fox News perpetually pushing a more conservative agenda, which of course television does do that because you have to have an audience to cater to. And so again, let's not act like they're doing this in some kind of malicious way. It's purely for money, especially with how most TV works. And you see that with CNN too, and MSNBC, which are even more left-leaning networks. But again, it all goes back to power.
Absolutely.
Especially considering that the Republicans now have a strategy to place the movements that they want to into position. And the Democrats, just for some reason, don't have the same fight that the Republicans do.
Well, Jonah, one interesting thing I found out, I was doing some research. The Democratic Republicans that Thomas Jefferson started, that was the party he started. People argued that was the first Democratic Party. That was the pioneer for the modern Democratic Party we have now. Thomas Jefferson followed the Constitution, by the book. Is it possible that the ideas have just shifted throughout the years? Certain cultural aspects have changed opinions? Or?
I mean, culture. I mean, that was what 250 years ago, something. Like
just
that.
about.
Yeah.
That's
I
a
mean,
nice guess.
So, but the Constitution hasn't changed. I mean, it has changed, but the Bill of Rights. I mean, it's kind of, people are kind of going away from that and focusing more on the media and what's going on in the government instead of what's going on in the country.
Well, if you want to bring up the Constitution, you see the origin of political parties to begin with is how do we interpret this document? And especially as time goes on further and further, you're not going to have the input of the authors. So then you have to start coming up with your own ideas and interpreting it yourself. And then that's where you see the document not only morph itself into a more modern piece of, not legislation, but as a modern form of government, but you also, again, just have that differing opinion that is necessary for a republic to function, and for some reason the parties don't feel that that is necessarily the key. They think that they can somehow dictate the country under one ideology. And
Yeah.
and that's why you see Republicans in power trying to put forward Republican ideas instead of trying to also put together Democratic ideas. But to be fair, in recent history, bipartisan efforts have kind of sucked.
Absolutely.
Looking back to Clinton and Gingrich, for instance. When
That was a rivalry.
When Newt
Always.
Gingrich took over the Speaker of the House, every effort they took to pass bipartisan legislation somehow fell flat. And it was because you didn't necessarily have an agreement on where the legislation should go, because conservatives and Democrats have, again, different agendas.
And another thing with history, we talked earlier about George Washington, the founding fathers. Washington said the worst thing that could happen to America is if we fell to a two-party system. Two big powers of different ideas. He fretted about that, and now here we are. I mean, what?
Honestly, I can't really tell what happened to the other parties, but I think it all comes back down to what Ray and Jonah was talking about between what people from different time periods and power. Because if you have a lot of power, right, within the government, you necessarily don't have to work with the other people. And I think that's a bad thing. I think the parties have been always fighting each other when instead they should be working together. Because, if we work together as one nation, we can accomplish many great things together. However, again, it comes back to power, as Ray said. The more power you have, the more you can push your ideology and complete your agenda. But I think it also comes back to Jonah, as in why is there political turmoil within the Democratic Republican? I think it's because as we grew up, the younger generation, we have a very different value than the ones before us, and have different views. So maybe back in the 1960s, they had a really strict view on immigration,
Sure, absolutely.
female rights, but as we began to develop as a nation in terms of culture-wise, we became more lenient towards it, became more accustomed to it, and we became more welcoming towards that. So that's why I feel like the Democrats and the Republicans are kind of going through a shift at the moment. And I think because the Democrats were kind of after the 2016 election with Donald Trump, we're kind of trying to solely resist him. I think they weren't really planning ahead on how they were going to play it, how they were going to resist it. It was more they were going to resist it. It made it sound like they were going to resist it at any opportunity they can.
Yeah.
Ray, do you?
Well, I was going to say the coincidence. So the last point you were talking about is I don't think the Republicans have either really thought about the end game of this Trump
As
presidency
well, yeah.
either.
I agree with that.
Because you see Congressman like Jeff Flake, who is appropriately named, if you ask me. He never commits to anything, and every time you think he will, he always somehow flakes. But you have almost the Reagan conservatives, I'll call them for lack of a better term. You have them leaving in order to pledge allegiance to Trump because he's the new big name. And if anything, what we're seeing from this Trump presidency, and I feel like I'm in the small minority of Democrats that think the Trump presidency might have actually been better for the Democrats than getting Hillary Clinton elected. But I can talk more about that if anyone wants me to. But what we see from Trump is the true impact of media on politics. Because all Trump does is he pushes out news, and it doesn't necessarily have to be meaningful. It's him mocking a physically disabled reporter. It's him saying Ford's accusations are credible, and then at a rally start discrediting them with information that is not true at all. He's purposely there to occupy the airwaves, and that's what gets you attention, and in the end, that's what gets you votes. And we see the Republicans falling in line with that because Trump is now he's their figure. He's become the elephant in the room. That was supposed to be Chris Christie, but that
kind of went bad.
I think he's still stuck on the bridge, from what I remember. But the Democrats have not necessarily picked up on that. But we're starting to see that more with candidates like Sanders, the one House representative in New York, Alexandria Cortez, all running on these socialist platforms. They're running on more extreme, provocative ideas because that's what gets attention and that's what gets you votes.
Well, Ray.
No, keep going.
I was just saying, Ray, because the Republicans are rallying against Trump, and that's good for the beginning. But don't you think, in the long term, this might hurt their reputation in some way? Because they got this man that's very provocative and said a lot of rather controversial stuff in many ways, wouldn't that kind of like damage their reputation and like what they stand for as a party?
Well, he's essentially co-opted the Republican Party, if you ask me, and I'm wondering if McConnell's actually trying to fill up the Supreme Court because once Trump leaves, he worries that the Republicans are going to have big losses. So at the very least, the Supreme Court will be a lasting legacy of conservative ideas that can somehow influence the country. But again, that's not necessarily going to be true because we're looking at midterms. The Democrats aren't necessarily going to definitively take the House and the Senate. It's still up in the air about whether or not a blue wave is going to happen because the Trump base is as fired up as the Democrats are supposedly. I do say supposedly because we just have no idea what they're going to do.
Right.
You'd think with all the words and the fire that's coming from the left, especially against Kavanaugh and such, that's going to transpire to votes, but in the end, the Trumpers are the ones that go out and vote.
Absolutely. And Gareth, I'll let you finish with this because
You
there
want
are
us to finish?
times.
Oh, you don't want me to finish?
Do you want to finish? Do you want to finish?
I'll
Billy?
let you.
No, please. There are times when Republicans and Democrats, going back to always being polar opposites, they do agree on things.
There
When
are.
especially when it comes to major times of turmoil with war, we were always not technically with Vietnam. There was a break, very two opposites on that, but they do come together. And do you think that can ever happen again?
Most certainly it can. The thing is, whenever there's something that can really impact all of us, it's definitely a time that we all tend to work together to try to find some resolution. It may not be the best one, but sometimes it's something, and something is sometimes better than nothing. Because quite frankly, over the years, there's always been, looking back, for example, in World War II, and throughout history, there's always been various reasons for us to act in ways that we have. Whether it be different social advances or lifestyles and things, the ways that we change. Sometimes we do need to work together on certain opportunities to perfect what it is we need to achieve in the lifestyle and the government that we are currently faced with. And for example, one thing that was very good that was created, as we mentioned years ago, creating the Constitution, how it's been interpreted over the years, we have had the opportunity to create amendments. That was one of the first things that was initiated when the Constitution was written, because they knew that as time passes, things are going to change, whether we like it or not. And that allows us to, in a roundabout way, alter them and basically dictate how things should be done generally so that everyone can accept it for the most part in ways that we would find suitable for our needs and wants. And it allows us to sort of work together better as a nation. Though, of course, the ideas and topics that come up over the years can vary from party to party, and of course, the alteration of power can, of course, fluctuate based on whatever is considered to be almost, I want to say a trend in a way, to be honest, but it's not probably the best vocabulary to choose for that sort of thing. But it is the idea that as time goes on, there are different things that we want and seek out, and we sort of look to see who can provide it to us the best.
Absolutely.
But then going back to the Constitution, I just want to say one more thing. Checks and balances.
Yes.
Yes,
What's-
absolutely.
Is supposed to keep power in check and balanced, but we are seeing that when one party controls almost every aspect of the branches, there's not really much checking or balancing going on, especially
True.
Yes.
especially when the parties now exist in an us versus them type atmosphere, which is going to take a long time to get rid of.
It may,
I agree.
but hopefully as time proceeds, we may find more ways that we can perfect this. It's hard to tell what people absolutely want because as a group, we might try to think in one particular way, but everybody has their own personal thoughts about these sort of
Exactly.
things, and they don't know where it is. Like sometimes we don't look hard enough into the future to see how things are going to turn out.
Yeah.
Too frequently, people are looking at the immediate here and now, and sometimes that can be a problem for us. So it does seem that some parties tend to take over, sometimes more than others, and then at other moments there are a bit of drawbacks and things can sort of flip-flop in a way, which has happened many other times throughout history too. And it's just basically a waiting game in a way to see what will happen next.
Well, this isn't news. For people fighting over different ideas. This is not, stranger things. This is something that's been going on not just with American government, but for many other things. Whenever it's come to different countries on their views about, for example, World War I and Wilson wanting the 14 points and the Treaty of Versailles. There have been different ideas, and people have not always agreed. But I think right now, after everything we've just discussed, there has to be something that both parties can agree on. Folks, that is the end of our episode of Talk with the Flock. I hope you enjoyed today's program. Have a wonderful day, and stay classy, E-Town.